Hello, today we'll have a very short video on how to make a decision when you're a member of a board. Unlike executives, boards operate on a different level. Boards have collective mind. There is not much I in a board. Executive will have to follow directions from boards, but their decisions, day-to-day decisions, are usually made by one person. However, on a board, every voice is equal to other board members, which means a consensus needs to be made. Let's have a look quickly how this works. It is quite possible that your constitution or some other document defines how any kind of voting is made. Typically, you need to call for a vote and follow certain procedures. If you don't have a very specific procedure, a typical simple voting system that really works well at most places goes like this. There is one person which nominates a topic. There is a second person which will support it. First person can be called nominator, proposer. There are several names for that. The second person always has the same title as seconder, creatively. Now, when you have two people supporting a decision, on most boards, this is typically considered to be mandatory for everyone to vote on that. A chair will call for a vote, but any vote which has a seconder has to happen. So if you don't have any special rules, in theory, anyone can run that vote. You may vote electronically, you may vote in person. There are many ways how you can vote. You can even vote secretly. In the case this is not a secret vote, typically it will be immediately obvious who voted for what, and your minutes need to reflect that. It is very important because sometimes in the future you can face situation of liabilities, something went wrong, or your shareholders or your members or whoever your stakeholders are may wish to know which one of you thought what. So unless there is a specific need for a secret vote, and it's better to avoid those whenever you can, it is important to record who voted how. There are 4 types of votes that will be recorded. First one is yes, you agree with it. Second one, no, obvious. Third one, abstain. And fourth one, did not vote. Choice of these 4 votes will tell you a lot about the person. And if you have a series of decisions, you can take the sentiment, is this person more on this side, more on that side, agrees with certain policies, disagrees with certain policies. Maybe this person is not even putting an effort, not showing up. Now each of those votes have certain consequences. When you're on board, everything has a consequence. If an event with a bad outcome happens and the previous decisions are being looked at, even if you haven't considered something, it can become your liability. If you had a look at something, you had to decide between risks, and sometimes it's not black and white situation. That kind of thing can actually help you with liability even if you made a wrong choice. Vote yes is an interesting vote. Yes means I agree. It sounds simple, but it is not. Because at many places, especially when board members are volunteers, they might get complacent. They will simply say yes to anything which sounds alright. But yes is a commitment. Yes brings liabilities. If you're not fully familiar with the topic, it might be better for you to abstain. Or if you do not want to abstain, you need to reasonably trust a judgment of some trusty source. It is your fiduciary duty to check all of the facts to the best of your knowledge. You should not come to a vote completely unprepared. However, there are situations. I've been in situations when I really wanted to vote yes, but certain components were not good, in my opinion. At that time, I wouldn't choose no, because if I chose no, it would appear that I disagree with this. It's not that I disagree with it. I simply disagree with some of the components. So sometimes you have to abstain, even if you are for or against something. You may also abstain if you've been forced to abruptly vote and you don't feel comfortable voting just yet. There is a possibility, which is generally accepted, to put so-called procedural motion. You will do something like that in a situation where someone is calling for a vote, there is a seconder, the board is forced to vote, you can sense that a lot of people do not agree on making a decision just yet. You can propose a postponement of the motion for whatever reason, and you find yourself a seconder, that motion will take precedence. And you can say, all right, we do not want to vote on this before we get this information or before we check something else. Procedural motion should typically override the need for the original motion and put it on hold. It's a really neat trick. I used it. Sometimes you will say no, even to something you think yes, but there is a particular reason why you're worried. Maybe it's a good idea, but you doubt in a capability. Maybe it's a good idea, but you doubt financially. Maybe it's a good idea, but you have some other doubts. So then you might really want to stop it rather than choosing to abstain. There are situations where no and abstain can be similar. Now, when we talk about abstaining, I would encourage you deeply, do not automatically vote yes for things that you're not sure of. Yes, we all sometimes take a shortcut, and shortcut makes sense. If someone comes, all right, we are running out of money, we need to cut on this, and have a little bit look at budget, we all agree it makes sense to cut it there. You might not need to go and drill into it if it's very, very obvious. Sometimes proposal can happen and within minutes you go for a vote, and sometimes that's just fine. Don't forget, you should vote when you feel comfortable, and if you don't feel comfortable, you should abstain. Your abstain vote means that something was not quite right for you. Your abstain also points that maybe it was rushed, but it might mean that you are not able to make a decision. Sometimes you will abstain if there is a conflict of interest. If you're proposing something that affects you or someone else is proposing something that has your interest in, you should certainly abstain. It is a fair thing to do. Did not vote is probably the worst vote it can happen to you. Did not vote means you did not vote. Typically, did not vote is being recorded when you're not present. Is that in person or online? You did not show up. You might be tempted to refuse to vote when there is a vote going on, but for that you should really use abstain, because minutes will be confusing if you just keep the hands like this and it be interpreted that you did not even attend, although minutes should show that you are in. It's confusing. So if you are really participating and you do not agree with either yes or no, or you don't want to take part of it, you should vote abstain. To determine the outcome of decision, you will clearly have to count the votes. When you count the votes, sometimes you will have a requirement 50% plus one vote, which is the most common scenario. But your constitution or some other documents like standing orders or whatever other documents you have defining these votes, they might determine that you have to have 2/3 of votes plus one or 3/4 of votes plus one, depending on what kind of decision is. And also certain decisions you actually cannot make as a board. Sometimes you need to run referendum among shareholders and among members in order to reach the decision. So those rules, depending on situations and depending on topics, will be well defined for you and should be very clear before you enter any kind of vote. One typical situation is a vote of non-confidence, which rarely does 50% plus one. It usually requires a higher percentage. Any change to constitution will always be a referendum. So there are special circumstances which you need to be familiar with, which your chair should know about, or maybe more experienced board members if you are unsure. One thing which is very important to understand about being on board is that whichever decision has been made, you all agree on it after. So let's say you have a board with 7 members, 5 were yes, 2 were no. You were one of those no. And something happens after. When you face public, when you face members, and when they say, why did the board do this kind of decision? Or if you end up on a court, it's your fiduciary duty to defend that yes vote. Now, minutes will show that you were against, and that may or may not lower your liability, depending, but if you really want to avoid liability, you need to speak with a legal professional and get an advice. For example, in Australia, where I'm recording this from, you can avoid the liability if you resign immediately after the vote for the reasons of that decision. That will typically get you out of the liability for that decision. Of course, there are some restrictions. For example, in Australia, last 2 members of the board cannot resign. So there are situations where you might not be able to get out of it, but that will be taken into account. People with executive mindset quite often have problem understanding the board mindset. And I can tell you, sometimes it can be even frustrating because there is a simple problem, there is a simple solution, and you just do reaction. It's a great idea, and it's an executive way of solving problems. Once you get used to sharing your thoughts and getting the feedback from other people, you will realize that quite a few times when you thought something, someone helped you shape your opinion. My opinion sometimes changes through the discussion. I don't mind it, because I strive for the best outcome, not for I told you so. And in between yourselves, you can always later say I told you so. But on the outside, you are one brain. The whole board is one collective mind. And while it takes time to get used to it, there are a lot of benefits in shared experiences, in shared wisdom, in things that make your decisions deeper, better thought. Some people struggle with one mindset and some people struggle with other mindset. You could find yourself being in both situations, executive and the board. And when you are on a board, you will have to take your executive hat off. You'll put your board hat on and enter this collective mindset. It's actually quite enjoyable, but it's not cut for everyone. I hope this video helped you to understand basics of voting on a board. Always check if there are any rules that have been already made that could probably modify this system, but in most cases, this is how things really work. Did it help you? Do let me know. See you next time.